Hi everybody. Today we're going to be working on doing primary shaping on new trees. As you can see with this guy right here, it is bought from a local nursery, which shows that you're going to be able to get a lot of potential off of something that you just find at a garden store, in your yard. It doesn't have to be a special bonsai tree to be started as a bonsai. Now the very first thing you have to do when you've gotten a tree like this is cut off the tags. Once you've done that and hopefully thrown them in the trash, you can start looking at a few other things on the tree. For instance, is it healthy? You absolutely never want to work on a tree that is unhealthy. It's very simple. If the tree is unhealthy and you do something traumatic like we're going to do to it today, you're going to end up killing the tree. Now, this isn't a suggestion, it's just a fact in bonsai. Never work on a tree that's unhealthy or you're likely to lose it. Now, the way we see if it's healthy or not is you can feel about the base. Now, if the tree moves a lot and the soil isn't moving, you have loose roots. And this is very bad. Now, if you're looking at the tree and you're not seeing a lot of green growth, if you're not seeing new growth in the spring and summer, and even with some species in the fall, then you have an unhealthy tree. Another way to find out is simply take the tree out of its pot. Most of the time we'll flip the pot over and use it as a little pedestal. This solid mass of roots is a great indicator of health. Now, taking it out of a pot and putting it like this also lets it see the entire tree. I can see the roots and I can see the first couple of inches of the tree just as easily as I can see the rest of it. What you'll want to do at this point is knock off the top layer of soil and start cleaning debris out of the tree. Now we will be fast forwarding a lot in this video just so you don't have to spend an hour and a half watching a video that should be relatively short. The first thing we're going to do is remove the debris from it. Now this can be dead foliage that's trapped inside the tree. It can also be dead branches, small twigs. One of the things we're going to be doing is very simple. You just take your fingers and you kind of lightly go through. This can be a little difficult on the hands, but as some of you can already see, a lot of the dead twigs are falling out of it. Now, once we get all that out, we're going to go through and cut off small dead branches. You want to leave large dead branches because they might be able to be incorporated into the overall effect of the tree. But see you in a bit. Now that we've given the tree a bit of a comb through, the next thing we have to decide is what style it'll become. Some trees can go into a diverse amount of styles and sizes. Think pines and junipers. Other ones, like giant sequoias, redwoods, they tend to be very selective in the way they grow, basically straight up and down. This means that they really enjoy being in a forest, twin trunk, single trunk, and really just formal upright. Now this guy, if we actually look closely, we'll see that it's two trees growing together. It's pretty obvious what kind of tree, or I should say what kind of style this tree would go well as. So one of the things we have to do is consider when you have two trees growing together, what is their growth going to look like? We'll work on that a little bit later. One of the things we have to consider now that we've got a general idea of what the style is going to be, is finding the tree's front. This is pretty easy actually. Most people without any type of knowledge of bonsai, or really even art, are able to determine the size, I should say, the front of the tree pretty easily. Basically, you look at the bottom of the tree, its primary branches, and you decide what is the most attractive angle. Now, the way we determine this in bonsai is actually group opinion, meaning the angle that I see, the front that I see, is going to be the same as a novice, and it's also going to be the same as a grandmaster, someone who's been doing bonsai for decades. It's really just what we all see as the most attractive angle. Now for that, we happen to be looking directly at it. It's really hard to see what this tree is going to become simply because it has so much growth. In just a minute though, we're going to start cutting off some of that growth and we'll start seeing the tree that is inside this one. So what we've done is basically clean the tree out further. We've gotten rid of a lot of branches that we simply can't use. Now, simply can't use is a very broad idea. When it comes to certain trees, you have to remove things like aggressive top growth, which is what this is right here. This is also aggressive top growth. So are these little guys here. You'll see aggressive top growth on trees that are younger or just species that grow more aggressively. Think candles on pines and what we call juniper whips on junipers, and basically any part of a boxwood that's been left in the sun for a couple of minutes. Now, things we can't use also, if you consider weeping willows, they're really the only ones who can have growth coming off the bottom of their branch. Most of the time, you want to go through, and if the branch is like this little piece has to come off, this little piece has to come off, so on and so forth, all the way down the branch. The reason is pretty simple. When trees get older, this part dies. Now, the part shooting up will also come off, and you get foliage pads, which are what we see on more mature, more attractive, generally older bonsai. A few other things you have to consider when you look at the tree is branches that are coming from the same spot. You have to take those off. They're unhelpful. Branches that are growing directly towards the viewing angle, what we usually call eye pokers, they have to come off. Stuff coming directly from the base, unless it is another trunk, has to be removed too. Another thing we really have to consider with this tree is where is the top? Now, if you get a tree from a garden nursery or even from a gentleman selling bonsai, or even dig it out of your yard, you have to bring it down a bit, usually. The reason for this, again, this whole thing up here is aggressive young growth. If we were to leave this here, this is a very sparse and tall piece of growth compared to this bundle of growth, which might be last year or the year before, and then the second top here, this is just too much of a proportion. So we can use math and determine the height of the tree, but we're not going to bore you with a lot of math. This isn't high school. So using a proportional understanding, the height of the tree, this tree, should be right about here. The reason for that, this height here isn't too much. It's not all the way up here, where you start to wonder why is one tree so much taller than the other one, and it's not super close, where it really just looks like two trees that are completely separate from each other that have been forced together. Now what we're going to do now is do a little bit of wiring and thin up the rest of this. We're also going to be cutting off the top of it and getting it back down to size. Now, if you have questions about wiring, we have an entire video dedicated to it, so we're not going to discuss it now. Except that with a tree like this, which is not going to be repotted, the wiring that we can do is a lot more aggressive than normal. By that I mean, we've removed a lot of foliage, and the roots are going to remain intact. So the tree is not going to be very ill affected by what we're going to do to it, which means you can wire more aggressively, and it also means that that aggressive wiring isn't going to hurt the tree as much. So we'll see you in just a second. The general shaping of the tree is done, and a lot of times you're going to want to stop at this point because wiring it can be traumatic, which we've said before. But I wanted to talk about just a couple of things before we move on. One is you notice both of the tops of this tree have been ginned. Now, looking at magazines and going to shows and just general pictures online, you're going to see a lot of twin trunk trees and forests, deciduous forests not so much, conifers definitely, that have a lot of gin on the top. Now, there's a reason for this. Adding gin to the tree makes it look older. Imagine a tree that's been struck by lightning decades later. It has dead wood, the wood has been bleached by the sun, and it looks a lot older. Now, a lot of times you'll see this, but you're not going to see it on every tree. The forest would have to be ancient and the tree is even older for every tree to have gin on it. Gin can help tell a story. If this gin here explains why this tree didn't get as tall as this one. Gin on this tree and this tree tells a very confusing story. Are they both stopped? Is this one going to now have time to grow up and get there? Which one is older? Did they happen at the same time? This one could not have possibly have happened after this one because lightning only strikes the tallest tree. So in this case, we're actually going to cut this gen off and allow the living growth to reestablish itself. Now the reason for that is you can tell a story here where this tree may have been younger. The trunk doesn't really help with that considering it's smaller, but over a couple of years we can get this trunk to be bigger. Or you can always just say lightning struck this one but didn't strike this one. Having gin on both can be confusing. Another thing about gin, generally speaking, if you put gin on the top of all of your trees, it starts to look a little bit like someone who everything they do, they always add a little bit of flair. Someone who only wears the color green or something like that. Now, we are going to wire this tree, but a word of warning, wiring a tree after removing this much foliage, because all that foliage still contained in the roots is going to spring back into the growth that's still there. You're going to want to watch the wire more carefully, even if you're doing it in the fall or winter, simply because it's going to spring back on you and you have a higher chance of wire burn. So we'll see you in just a second. So we've done just about all the wiring we're going to do on this tree today. Now you'll notice a couple of things with the wiring. The branches that are lower have been wired downward. This is to show age on a tree. As a tree's branch gets heavier, as it gets older and longer, it'll actually start to move in its joint, pushing itself downward. Now if we wired all of these branches downward, we'd be talking about a very old tree. We haven't done that for two very specific reasons. One is this is clearly not an older tree. It's relatively young, it has young bark, young branches, and very small branches. The second reason we didn't wire everything down is because having a tree that looks very old and is still going to be growing very aggressively won't work either. So we've made this a moderately aged tree. The lower branches are growing downward. The medium branches, the middle branches are growing straight. These are ones that are still getting long. And then the top one are all growing upward, with the exception of the gin that we've left here. This shows a tree that is, in human terms, 25, 35 years old, still very strong. It's got a lot of years ahead of it, but it is starting to show just a little bit of age, a little bit of gray in the hair, maybe a little bit of wrinkles, and generally speaking though, it's still very healthy. Now, one of the other things we want to show with the wiring is the wiring that we've put on, we're going to be very careful about, because now that we've taken all of this foliage, and we've taken quite a bit of foliage off, that energy is going to be doubled into the new branches, meaning they're going to swell up dramatically. So you keep an eye on them to make sure you don't have Well, that's just about all we're going to do with this guy today. Now, there are a few things you have to consider for the aftercare. The first thing is to keep the tree in shade for a few days. The reason for this, removing all that foliage can be quite traumatic, and putting it in full sun, if it's spring or summer, is going to be very dangerous. The exception to this is if you're doing work on the tree going into fall or winter. You're going to want to water well, meaning water until the tree is draining, the water draining out of the bottom of the pot, just to keep it healthy. The last thing you're going to want to do is make sure you don't fertilize for at least 2 weeks. Now, this doesn't mean fertilize after 2 weeks. regardless of your fertilizing schedule, put it back on its normal schedule, but not until after 2 weeks. The reason for that is, again, this is very traumatic. We've taken about 85 to 90% of the foliage off, and that would be like having heart surgery, then hitting the gym and taking steroids. Very dangerous. There are a few nevers. Never repot a tree like this after doing this kind of heavy trimming. Again, heart surgery combined with another kind of surgery. It's very dangerous. Never remove all the foliage on a branch, meaning if we took all of the green off this or all the leaves off of the deciduous tree, it tells the tree that it does not need to keep that branch alive. It'll let the twig dry out, or even a full-size branch dry out and then die. Now, when you wire a tree, you want to make sure that you only wire it after it's been lightly shaped. Doing heavy shaping and wiring the tree is, again, dramatic. Another thing to remember, when you do wire a tree, you want to lightly trim the foliage, wire the branches, and then finish working on the foliage, just like we did today. The reason for that is very simple. If I were to shape this branch while it was still at this position, coming up like this, I'm only going to be able to guess the angle that it's at and how much foliage that angle should have. If I have taken off what I can't use, put the branch into position, and then trim the rest of the foliage, I can better understand what I need to do to the tree. Like I said, that's just about everything you need to know about working on a tree like this. We'll see you next time. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to hit the like button, the subscribe button, visit our Facebook, YouTube page, and website. Feel free to make an appointment and come by the nursery too. If you have questions or ideas for future videos, please leave them in the comments or email them to us. Really hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you next time.